Hello, and thank you for joining us. On behalf of Semperis and Carasoft, I would like to welcome you to today's webinar, Identity Security for the Public Sector Protecting Active Directory. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. Please note all of your lines have been muted to reduce any background noise. Please direct all of your questions to the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We will do our best to answer all of your questions at the end of the presentation. If for some reason we do not get to your question, our team at Carasoft will follow up with you after offline. This webinar is being recorded and a link will be sent out in a follow-up email for you to view again or share with a colleague. We are pleased to offer one continuing professional education or CPE credit to those that attend today's webinar. In order to qualify for the credit, you must be present, registering your attendance by signing in with your full name, and actively participating in the polling questions throughout the entirety of the webinar. For more information on the CPE credits we are offering, our CPE sponsor NASBA, and the submission process, please click the link on your screen. If you meet all of today's requirements, you will receive your certificate of completion within a few weeks. Before I introduce today's speaker panel, I would like to tell you just a bit about Carasoft. Carasoft is the trusted government IT solutions provider and a top GSA schedule holder, supporting an ecosystem of manufacturers, resellers, integrators, and consulting partners committed to serving the public sector. The dedicated cybersecurity and defense team at Carasoft specializes in providing federal, state, local, and education customers with a variety of cybersecurity solutions to secure their cyber ecosystem. Our contact information will be at the end of the presentation, so please don't hesitate to contact us for any of your needs. At this time, I'd like to introduce the speakers for today's webcast. Jim Doggett, CISO for Semperis, Sean Doobie, Principal Technologist for Semperis, and Luke Kane, Senior Solution Architect and Team Lead for Semperis, and our moderator, Kevin Noneman, Area Vice President for the Americas for Semperis. The floor is all yours, Kevin.
Well, thank you, Holly and Josh, and really to the entire Carasoft team for helping us put this together. We're excited to be here. And thank you to the audience for really taking the next hour and spending time with us out of your day to hear us kind of focus on really an Active Directory educational session, identity educational session, a chance for you to ask some esteemed experts in the field about identities, protection of identities, and specifically Active Directory. So the goals and intent that we have for the next hour, as I said, it's really an education on Active Directory identity systems and really tips and tricks on how you may secure your identity systems for now and in the future. And if you can take one or two things back to your organization and provide more value, then you consider this an hour well spent. So how this is going to work is we have several questions that we've kind of arranged to ask the panel. If you have a question, as Holly said, please put it in the chat and we can address that real time. And then we're also going to have a few polling questions throughout the next hour, right? We ask you some questions just on your security posture or things like that. And we'll hopefully have some good talking points on that. After we're completed, we'll take any questions that we have missed during the panel discussion and we'll address them then. So without any further ado, I don't want to take any thunder away from our panelists, but we have an extreme filled panel with tremendous amounts of experience in identities and Active Directory. So I'd like to give them a couple of seconds each to introduce themselves. First, our CISO at Semperis, Jim Doggett. Jim, you want to take a minute or two to introduce yourself?
Sure, love to. Thank you so much, Kevin. I appreciate that, and I appreciate everyone attending today. This is a topic that I came to Semperis because this is a topic that I think the entire security industry has not spent enough time with over the last several years, and with the risks increasing around this space, it's one I want to make sure as many people as possible get to know it. By background, I spent the majority of my career at EY, retired from there, and had several stints of CISO at JP Morgan, Kaiser Permanente, and then at AIG, the insurance company. So after that, I was about to retire, but I decided that I think this is an area of Active Directory, which I didn't focus on personally enough probably in my past. So to me, it's an area that I will spend the next several years trying to make sure everyone understands the risks involved in this.
Awesome. Thanks, Jim. And he is a wanted entity within the Semperis field. Next is Sean Doobie. He is our Chief Technology Evangelist, I like to call him. Sean, a minute or two to introduce yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Kevin. I like to say that I've been doing Microsoft identity as long as Microsoft has been doing identity. So I date way back, even before Windows NT, but Windows NT and rolled that out for Texas Instruments around the world. And then I was one of the original architects of Intel's Active Directory, and then helped run it, ending up with leading the Active Directory team at Intel after 10 years. I'm a 15-time Microsoft MVP on the topic, and I've written a lot of articles about it. I've been inside the Microsoft ecosystem for most of my career, including 5 years as an identity consultant. So talking about and understanding the Microsoft hybrid solution from Office 365 and Azure Active Directory back on down to AD, and I've sort of come full circle to talk as Jim has to come back and talk about this vulnerability that we all face.
Right. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Sean. And finally, really excited to have Luke Kane. He's a senior team lead in our engineering field group. He's got a lot of experience in the SLED space and the Fed space and the military space, and his kind of field level expertise will be very pertinent to this conversation. So Luke, want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I appreciate it, Kevin. Thanks. Hello, everyone. Again, name is Luke Kane. I'm a solutions architect team lead here at Semperis now. I lead a team of technical folks who architect, integrate, and troubleshoot IAM focused software solutions. I've worked here for the last 3+ years, but I've also spent, as Kevin alluded to a moment ago, a lot of time within the information security space. We've got more than 17 years in various roles in both private and primarily the public sector, with most of my technical expertise and knowledge coming from supporting the intelligence communities, so NGA, NRO, NSA, FBI, DIA, as well as the federal space, DoD, and the US military as well. I was active duty and did a lot in that space. So I've got plenty of real world experience, and exposure to kind of talk a little bit more and give some content and context around our focus topic of discussion for today.
Great. Well, thank you, Luke. And I'm Kevin. I'm the moderator, so I'll be asking the questions. Okay, let's get started. So Holly or Josh, first polling question. I think we'll let that go for about 30 seconds, 45 seconds.
I can't wait to see I think the results are always interesting.
Yes.
In a world where most of the publicity is around cloud.
We need a little Jeopardy music.
I was thinking.
Look at that.
Oh, wow.
Okay. You know what? And quite frankly, that's kind of what we expected. Never, right? 78%. So all right. So let's talk about the first question. And I think, Sean, primarily for you, but please, guys, obviously all provide your 2 cents. Sean, can you provide just a brief history? One of the things that we see here at Semperis is individuals and corporations really don't necessarily understand Active Directory, right? So just a brief history of Active Directory and the importance of identity repositories in terms of continued operations.
Sure. And I just have to say, looking back at that, those results, that is the identical response rate for never that I saw on a webinar that I gave about a month ago. So I'm two makes a trend, right? So almost, and I'll round it up and say almost 80%, which is pretty impressive. Never, just don't see it in their future. So Active Directory, as I speak about AD, and as I said, I've been inside it since it was invented, but talking to people on the outside of it, what's happened over time is, so AD came out, it's almost a quarter of a century old, which is in information technology terms is a lifetime or several lifetimes. And yet it's actually, and it's everywhere. It's ubiquitous in the on-premises identity space. I think it's probably about the most successful product that Microsoft has ever rolled out, or the most popular role for the Windows Server world. And remarkably, after all this time, instead of fading into the sunset we've seen from the polls there, it's not going away anytime soon. And in fact, I'd argue that it's more important than it ever was, because most organizations are hybrid. And so when you have a hybrid identity infrastructure, that has to be sourced somewhere. In other words, a hybrid identity infrastructure is taking your on-premises identity and projecting it into cloud services, so you can get single sign-on into cloud services. And almost universally, that identity source is Active Directory. So it's more important than it ever was. I think what we are seeing in the marketplace, though, is there is a I'm not sure the right word is, a casualness around Active Directory, a comfort with it, because nothing ever seems to go wrong with it. And so over time, what happens is the technology gets older, there are fewer people to maintain it, maybe people resign, and it becomes, from a management viewpoint, if you're close to the ground on it, it's super important and important to maintain. From a management viewpoint, it's just like, oh, it's just there. It always works. It's in the background. And so people forget, they even forget that it works. The analogy is, like your electricity. It's always there. You don't think about the fact that when you turn the light on, when you flip the switch, the light comes on. And then not until you have, sorry, Jim.
John, I have to totally agree with you there. And again, even in my personal, when I was at AIG, I assumed that that Active Directory was just always on and always there. I'd never focused on it from a security perspective, which in hindsight was probably dumb, but it's like you said, people just assume it works.
Well, and Jim, you're a perfect example of senior management, and you're looking at a million different components that are all a bunch of moving parts that are in an IT infrastructure. And when you never hear about any issues with Active Directory, you're like, okay, great, awesome. I'm not going to worry about it.
Yep.
So Kevin, to roundabout answer your question, what's the importance of identity repositories? They're really at the core of everything. Once you get up above the network level and the ability to actually, send packets on the network, in a modern environment, identity is pretty much the next thing that says what you can do and what you can access. And certainly that plays into the security issues that we're going to talk about.
Yeah, awesome. And we're going to come back to it works because I have an anecdote for that. But the next question I have is really for Jim. Jim, from a CISO perspective, been a long time CISO, but where do you see Active Directory and various identity systems fall within like risk tolerance from a CISO perspective and risk mitigation strategy?
Yeah. At first, let me take one quick step back and I think you said the key word to this, it's all about risk management. CISOs today, we cannot fix everything. We have to find a way to prioritize, and that should be based on the risk that security issues pose to the actual business, to its continued operations, to its security of its data, to the present, privacy of the data, those kind of things. And I think Active Directory, especially in the last 5 years with the advent of more ransomware, has moved very quickly up to almost the top of the ladder. And let me sort of explain why I think it's one of the highest risks out there now. let's say someone breaches your system and goes out and steals information or steals some confidential information. It hurts the company. Reputationally, it would hurt you. You may have to pay fines to the government. You may have to send out free credit reports, do all those things, all terrible things. But compare that to a ransomware where you literally, your entire company is not operating. That to me is a much higher risk. And again, thus it deserves more attention today. And at least in my experience, coming across a whole lot of companies, virtually every company I talk to and have seen are completely dependent on Active Directory. If it is down, nothing happens in the company. Their critical applications don't work. They can't log on to the network even. So how do they even recover if you can't even get on the network? So to me, it's just an area that I think that has risen in the recent years tremendously on the risk level, and thus it warrants, I think, security offices re-challenging themselves. Am I doing stuff in the right priority? And if it was me in today's world in that environment, I would move it ahead of a whole lot of things, and especially things like AI and others where we know there's going to be a risk and it's a risk, but today, does it pose a risk even close to what Active Directory could do to us?
That last comment reminds me of a phrase I heard a lot at previous roles. I've been hearing it more and more frequently. Identity is the new perimeter. Kind of aligns with what Jim and Sean have just been saying.
Yeah, I've come to start using the phrase existential risk, because it can and has, and for organizations, it can pose a risk to the continued existence of the company, and because of the hit that you can take in a cyber attack and to bring back Active Directory. We'll talk about that in a bit.
I also I talk to a lot of people and say, well, Active Directory to us isn't a huge target. And all I can say to that is I would beg to differ, because
they're not paying attention.
In my experience, and if you go to any of the big outfits that do incident response in the company, in the whole world, virtually every single major breach, if you go back and research it, has Active Directory has been the target. And again, why is it the target? And again, maybe Sean, you talk a little bit about why breaching Active Directory is such a big deal.
Yeah, for sure. I'll absolutely talk about that.
Yep. Great. So one more question primarily for Luke before we get to the second polling question. So Luke, we have our audience, a very heavy sled, some Fed participants in the audience. So based on the background that you have and what you do on a day-to-day basis, being an architect in the field, what are some of the things that you see public organizations doing to safeguard their identity systems, Active Directory?
It's a good question. So traditionally, the Department of Defense and the federal sector, they've implemented security controls based around various NIST special publications. I'm sure everybody on this call is familiar with, right? NIST SP 800-53, NIST SP 800-171, 837. While 853 is the actual regulatory standard, which again, I'm sure everybody's familiar with, 837 provides more of a guideline to go about constructing a security baseline. But a lot of this, from what I've been seeing in the last couple of years, is going to be superseded by this new CMMC, or Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification process. It's already slowly being rolled out now, and it's due to become a hard requirement by 2026. Last time I did a little bit of research on this. There's a lot of challenges associated with meeting all the requirements or controls, but two of the biggest hurdles, or at least the complaints that I hear most frequently, are organizations are being underfunded, or just a general lack of resources and or people. Some of this I think Sean alluded to earlier, where we've got kind of a lot of the workforce and the folks that have traditionally been embedded in on-prem ADDS as we know it. They're getting to a point in their career where they're looking to retire, move on, and then the younger generation is kind of behind the curve, and there's a learning curve associated with that. But the second hurdle is prioritization of the tasks associated with securing AD. And I think some of that was what Jim was talking about regarding, hey, we're not doing a good job prioritizing securing our identity systems over machine learning and AI and all the new, pretty glittering and stuff that comes out.
Hmm.
I think back, and I'm kind of going to go on a story a little bit here, but it's related to something we were talking about. So obviously I work for Semperis now, more so in the private sector, but we do have some SLED customers as well, right? One of the things that I recall actually kind of triggered me into shifting my career path and being more cybersecurity focused was the OPM data breach. I don't know if folks remember that several years back. That was to the point Jim and Sean have been alluding to earlier about, hey, a lot of the attacks that we see are focused initially on AD, right? Identities as kind of the focal point to get in. It's funny for me to kind of look back full circle now and think, man, that was the event for me where I decided I'm not going to be just a systems administrator, right, focused on, but I also need to have a deeper level understanding around securing, right, proactively, what we call the white hat security aspect of things. But hopefully that answers your question, Kevin, around kind of some of the certs.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Awesome. All right. Why don't we get Josh to the second polling question, and then we'll continue with some of the general questions we have for the panel.
Scale of 1 to 5.
That Jeopardy music.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Sean.
Understanding
Let's
ways
hear
to
it.
defend.
We'll make witty banter in the background while people.
I have a joke.
No, please, Kevin.
Don't do it.
Please vote quickly.
Okay.
Okay.
So 1 to 3. So what is that? That's almost 85%. Not terribly familiar with that. So again, not unexpected, which kind of leads really into our next question. So Semperis has been around for about 7 years, right? Give or take. And just what's happened the past 5 years, guys, right? You guys have talked about, well, Active Directory always just kind of works. So I call it the plumbing. It's the plumbing of your operations. If your plumbing doesn't work, it's like, holy cow, right? And I heard identity is now the new perimeter. We use that a lot. But really, what's happened over the last X amount of time where Active Directory has become such a popular target where bad actors will kind of dig into? So I don't know who wants to kind of take that one. I'll kind of leave it up to you to kind of decide who answers that.
I can jump in if you want, and just
Right.
and sort of go. We can start at the high level and work ourselves probably a little bit more in. But I think there's several things that are sort of driving why it's a target. Number one is it can be a direct target, but it also, remember, people break in many ways, through phishing, through many ways. And once they get in and get an account, they may not be in an account that has any juice or any power. So the immediate thing they want to do is escalate privileges. So Active Directory is the most logical place to go to do that typically. You couple that with the fact that Active Directory has been around for 20 some years. And again, Sean, you'll get into this more, but it wasn't built as a security tool. It's not by nature secure. And the last thing I would sort of say then is there's not a whole lot of expertise around the world. I mean, every company you go to, how much real expertise do you have in Active Directory? I see it far more that people don't want to touch Active Directory because they're worried they're going to mess something up, not that we're going to do this to make it more secure. So again, all those things I think lead to a path where bad guys want to get there, and it's an easy path to go to get what they want to get.
I would defend myself. I would defend my baby a little bit and say that AD can be pretty secure. It was definitely, I mean, as I said, it's a quarter of a century old. I mean, what were you, speaking to the audience or speaking to everybody here, what were you doing in 1997 when Active Directory was designed? So we can take a minute to think about that if you can recall back that far. For me, I mean, we talk about the failings of Active Directory in the modern security world, but for me, it's amazing that most of the world is still quite successfully running at it. It's just that it wasn't designed for the world that we find ourselves in today. The way I look at this is I keep coming back, and I've been doing this for years, is simple math. The reason AD is attacked is simple math. 90% of on-premises organizations around the world of 500 people or more depend on Active Directory. 90% of organizations approximately have a hybrid identity architecture. So AD is even more important than that was. Mandiant says that 90% of the cases that they get involved in involve Active Directory, either directly to corrupt Active Directory, or as Jim said, using it as a route to get to the goodies, to get to the stuff. That's why it's targeted. And because of the amount of time it's been around, yeah, it's a clear, and you know, as we looked at in the previous poll, the skill level that it takes to defend Active Directory and adequately secure Active Directory is sometimes really, it's like a 400 level to be able to do it on your own without any assistance.
That attack surface, I think it's very wide, right? A wide breadth, right? I think kind of going back to the privilege escalation, and I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. I know we're probably going to dig in a little bit when we chat more around kind of the mitigation security controls that we have. But that privilege escalation piece and the mapping to MITRE ATT&CK framework, and some, you know, there's once they've initially got their 0-day or their foot in the door and trying to figure out the keys to the kingdom, right? How to get to DA, EA, you know, and exfiltrate the DIT that has all the identities, whatever it is they need to do. But yeah.
As long as we're throwing doom and gloom out there before we talk about sweetness and light. So just recently, I saw this last week. Alex Weinert put this up at our HIP Global Conference in New York City. Alex is the vice president of identity security at Microsoft. He said that, well, and it wasn't his report, it was actually CrowdStrike's report that said that there has been a 682% increase, or is it 582, something like that, increase in Kerberoasting attacks on Active Directory in the last 12 months. So almost 6 times. And so we're not going to really get into it in this, but suffice it to say that Kerberoasting is a difficult to defend against attack. There's some very simple steps you can take to make it to make your organization less vulnerable to it. But if your organization is vulnerable to it, it can take literally minutes for an attacker that is gotten control of a user account on a PC through a phish, doesn't need any administrative rights. They can get themselves administrative rights in Active Directory in literally 10, 15 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, it's the size of the attack surface, because now it used to be sophisticated. Users could get in there, but now, no, now it's any script kiddie practically. There are playbooks in there. I've seen the playbooks in Word, and all you have to do is follow the steps to the gold mine.
Yeah, they've automated a lot of that, right? The whole all the different types of BFA brute force attacks, right? You've got rainbow attack, dictionary attacks. I've witnessed firsthand in customer environments where their Azure AD sync account, right, was getting BFA'd, or an identity that had it rights into, right? But I think for me, I come back to a lot of this can be prevented by, and I've had to do this with customers of ours, where we stress the importance of enabling a lot of the pertinent advanced auditing and audit logs, logon events, as they become really crucial when later on you're playing back for forensics analysis, right? I mean, obviously there's a balance there, because you have to keep in mind the cost of retaining those events, be it on your domain controllers or within your SIM, whether that's Splunk, QRadar, whatever the SIM of choice is. But point being, if you don't have those events turned on and enabled by default, then we're not going to capture them.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah,
Yeah, interesting. You know, they say, you know, hackers don't hack in, they log in, right? Which is so true.
Yep.
You know, bad actors in there, and it just seems to be proliferating at a rate that is, I think, even beyond what we even thought several years ago. So let's move to. I think this kind of goes into another good question. More for Luke, but again, chime in, guys. You know, since Luke, you have a lot of experience with SLED in the public sector. You know, what's some of the low hanging fruit that various organizations can utilize to protect themselves? You know, we talk a lot about indicators of compromise, indicators of exposure, but what are some of the things that they can do to act on immediately to improve their security posture?
So let's kind of go back to a point we made earlier on some of the hurdles, right? One of the big ones for organizations that I hear a lot is they're underfunded or they're struggling with where to focus their time and efforts, right? Prioritization. There are actually some free or open source tools that are out there. Semperis actually offers that Purple Night for those who might not be aware, right? Which has a lot of these security indicators. We're discussing indicators of exposure, indicators of potential compromise that can give customers insight into, well, you know, I heard Sean Doobie talk about curb roasting attacks, and that's a mechanism. How do I know what are my curb roasting targets, right? I know I've got some service accounts out there that have some privilege rights that require curb roast for authentication. Are those part of the IOEs, IOCs? The short answer is yes. And Purple Night will give you insight into that, as well as how to go about mitigating those gaps. So I actually saw earlier this morning, as a matter of fact, we just released our 4.0 version of Purple Night, which also includes some new features as well as integration with Okta, kind of diversifying our capabilities. Additionally, we also have Forest Druid, which can give organizations some insight into the attack paths to tier 0 assets. Again, we're thinking about domain admin, enterprise admin, or even domain controllers themselves, some of the other privileged groups that are in AD. We do have some data. Let me pull up here. I guess I can't screen share on that one. And I won't get into all of it. We've got over 150 now, 171 security indicators that are built into our Purple Night, which kind of gives customers a point in time to say, okay, let me get sort of an idea holistically of what's the grading look like for my identity and access management platform today, right? If I were to grade and score, and we have various categories, all of these map to, I mentioned earlier, the MITRE ATT&CK framework. That's kind of the goal with Purple Night. But I don't want to get into the 172 indicators.
Yeah, I think it's sort of important as you take a step back. What you're talking about, in my mind, is the first step in securing an area, which is harden the existing software that's out there so that it doesn't have any gaping holes or as many gaping holes. Now, we know over time things change, but at least you get a baseline started. And running a tool like Purple Night allows you to at least know where your big vulnerabilities are, so you can take step one, in my mind, to protect it, which is to close the big gaps.
Yep. Amen. Assess and close them.
Yeah. For everybody, for all the organizations on here, if you should happen to be, for all you underfunded organizations in this call, which is probably everybody. So it's worth reiterating that Purple Night is entirely free. We don't see anything of it. It runs, you download it. I think we are aware of the download, but that's it. You can run it unprivileged in your environment. None of the data goes back to us. It's so self-contained that every time you run it, you have to accept the EULA every time. But it spits out, like, I believe it's about a 75-page report on your security status. And we actually did a survey not long ago from customers that chose to tell us in general what kind of results they got. Again, we don't see that, but the organizations scored an average of 72 on their first run of Purple Night, which is frankly better than last year's, which was 61, but it's still a low C, not great. But let's see what else. The lowest score was in account security, go figure. And then others were a little bit better from there. And then after you ran it, so Purple Knight gives you clear guidance on how to, first off, on what the importance of the vulnerabilities are. So you can attack the most, if you'll pardon the expression, you can tackle the most important ones first. So they said that the report says that users reported an average of a 40% improvement and as much as a 64% improvement on follow-up assessment scores after applying the remediation guidance that was in there. So when you look at things in terms of the MITRE ATT&CK framework, before the attack, during the attack, after the attack, you know, as my my sensei on the wall behind me there would say, yeah, he's there. He's hidden behind my. He would say the best block is to not be there. So the best strategy is to either not be there or to make it difficult enough that they'll go elsewhere. It's like Kevin was threatening to tell some dad jokes. And so I'll use the bear camping analogy and applying it to cybersecurity, which is that, you know, it's the old joke. If you're out camping and you encounter a bear when you're out camping with your friends and you encounter a bear, you don't have to run faster than the bear. You just have to run faster than your friends. And so the cybersecurity analogy for that is, even if your organization isn't perfect, if it's more trouble than it's worth to the threat actors, assuming it's not nation state, but then it's more to the cybercrime threat actors, they'll essentially throw their hands up and go someplace where it's easier to get a return, because they're all about, you know, they're like the ultimate capitalists. They want as much money as they can make, as quickly as they can make it, as easily as they can make it. Those three things will really explains a lot of cybercrime trends and activities.
Great. Awesome. Well said. Josh, why don't we go to our third polling question, and then we'll talk a little cyber insurance after that polling question. Why did the developer go broke?
Why did the developer go broke?
Yeah.
Doing a joke.
Oh man, I don't know. Why did the developer go broke, Kevin?
He used up all his cash.
Oof.
I mean, come on, that's kind of funny.
I have a way to put him on mute. I'll tell the only joke I know. What does the dyslexic agnostic insomniac do?
Agnostic insomniac.
I'll save you the trouble. They stay up. They stay awake at night and wonder if there's a dog.
Okay, so guys, what are you surprised at the? So 80% have a solid or are thinking about it. 20% have not begun to think about it.
Yeah, one thing I'll make a comment on for the 20% that have a solid strategy, I'd like to challenge them. Because a strategy not only involves making sure you're hardened, you continuously monitor, but it also means you are prepared to recover if the bad happens. So if your Active Directory gets ransomware, have you actually gone out and practiced having to restore and rebuild your Active Directory? I haven't found many that have done that, but if you haven't, you definitely need to include that if you want to state that you're ready for that.
Okay. So do you want to just allude on that, or you want to go to cyber insurance?
Go either way you want.
I'll say, actually, on that note, Jim, we had a meeting last week, as a matter of fact, with our technical delivery leadership team here at Semperis, and some of the statistics we pulled out. So we obviously have our ADFR, Active Directory Forest Recovery product, that automates full recovery of an entire forest, right? In a scenario where stuff hits the fan and I have to recover ADFR helps with that. Well, what I found the most interesting, or I was kind of surprised at, was we had upwards of 35% of our own customers have yet to simulate a test recovery drill. Granted, there's a multitude of reasons for this. At times, you know, it takes resources, infrastructure, getting the people involved, the network team. If you've offloaded DNS to blue cat or info blocks and it's not an AD, you have to loop them into this test. And there's obviously a lot that goes around, but I could tell you from experience that the confidence that comes from having run this drill even once is worth the effort. It definitely helps to at least not just having something on a plan of your business continuity plan written down, but the confidence that comes with testing it even once a year or once if you haven't run a test. Yeah, it saves a lot.
Yeah, and a couple other points on recovery. One, if you've never recovered, you probably, most of us at least, don't understand the complexity of doing so. It's not as simple as taking a backup and copying it back up. If you listen to Microsoft, it's 29 steps and 75, 80 pages of very detailed steps that you have to take, which generally takes weeks or longer, not hours. And for most of us, at least, where we can't afford for the whole business to be out for that long. So that's the importance to me of practicing recovery and making sure you know how quickly you can recover.
Amen.
Yeah, this is one of the reasons that I came full circle back to Semperis, is because people that are not AD administrators, and most of us are not AD administrators, don't realize the incredible risk involved when AD is attacked and crippled by a cyber attack. And our partners at CDW that do data recovery have a slide where they say it takes, after a cyber attack, it takes an average of 21 days to recover just basic IT functionality, the very, very basics. And that's 21 days of 24/7, pizza boxes in the war room, all that sort of thing. Of that 21 days, they have found through being involved in these incidents that 14 of the 21 days is about getting Active Directory back again. 14, that's 2/3 of the recovery time. And if you'll allow me, Kevin, I'll say a couple of things about why that is. So AD's not, it's not a regular application. It's not a file share. It's not an Exchange server. It's not a SharePoint server. It's this highly complex distributed application sharing information every second around all of the domain controllers that comprise an Active Directory forest. If a threat actor is able to escalate privileges into Active Directory and then gain administrative rights in Active Directory, that means there are two things for your directory. Number one, it means they've landed malware on your domain controller. So you can't trust your domain controllers if you recover them from backups, because the dwell time for malware is typically longer than you keep backups. Certainly Active Directory backups. We don't have enough time to get into the details of this, but Active Directory backups are not good as long as you would, in the same way that you would think of as a file server backup or an IIS server backup. They're not good for very long because there's so many internal changes going on in AD literally every second. That's the one thing. You can't trust the domain controllers anymore. And if you recover them conventionally, domain controllers will restore with the malware on them. The second is that if a threat actor is able to drop malware on a domain controller, that means that they had administrative rights into the Active Directory service itself, which means they can put backdoors in, they can compromise other aspects of Active Directory. So now you can't even trust what's in AD and what the bad guys might have done to Active Directory. So that means long story short, you have to go through a process that's known as forced recovery. And forced recovery is that 29-step process that Jim talked about that is insanely complex. And I don't overstate this stuff. It is. And if you get anything wrong, you've got to start over again.
Yep.
And you have to execute all of it across multiple locations or multiple data centers. At the same time, everybody's running around and screaming because your organization is down. Anybody that's done a forced recovery, and I'll do webinars or I'll do seminars at conferences, and all I have to do is ask the audience, is there someone in there that has done a forced recovery? And if the people raise their hand, they're like, no, I never want to have to go through that again.
Right. Yeah. So
Amen.
let's pause for a sec. There's a great question, and I want to add, and this is all intertwined, right? So this is good stuff. So I'm sure you've seen a lot of common mistakes that customers make trying to secure Active Directory. Can you tell a little bit about these mistakes and maybe the most frequent ones? Highlight the most frequent ones.
Ooh, so I can think of some of when Sean was speaking that also kind of relates back. This is Alexander's question that I see
Yep.
in here, right?
Yep.
So going back to the point that Sean had made earlier regarding all of the other applications that are in a production environment, right? And I'm going to tie this into a real world experience we had with a customer of ours by, anonymizing the data as best I can here. We talked about kind of running a forest recovery and securing the steps associated with that 47-page document Microsoft has. There's a lot entailed there, and how that relates to ADFR. We have another product at Semperis called DSP, Directory Services Protector, which really gives customers insight into all those applications that are making changes to a production AD environment that we're not aware of, right? I may know that I have this application that syncs, identities or users from production into my dev or QA, and it's grabbing certain attributes, right? But what I don't have insight into is how often is it syncing that data, or what data is it syncing? Is it deleting the same value and rewriting it over and over and over again? We don't really have insight to that just naturally, right? When we get DSP, that's our other Semperis product in place, we have insight into that, right? So we had a story, actually, it was probably about a year and a half ago. I worked with a customer, and one of our solution architects here at Semperis actually leveraged DSP and the data we had there to be able to pull out and say, we can see this application that you have that's supposed to be syncing data to your dev and QA. It's rewriting, it's deleting the same value and rewriting it on all these user objects over and over and over and over again. So if we look at if you're familiar with rep admin, show object meta is a command line syntax for looking at the metadata value on certain objects in AD, and I'm probably getting a little deep technically here, but this application was rewriting where some of these values were in the 300,000-400,000, right? So this application was misconfigured, right, to AD, and the customer had no idea. The way we saw this was we rolled out DSP, we saw some bloat to the database. We're like, we thought we needed 0.5 terabyte of storage, but we're at 800, 900 gig, and we're still growing. What's happening here? So that,
Okay.
hopefully that helps answer that question.
Yeah.
Gives you insight. Yeah. And the aspect, it's not all the recovery aspect of it, as Luke says, Directory Service Protector shows you what's going on inside of Active Directory. And we have a product called Active Directory Forest Recovery that automates that recovery process. And so a lot of what Luke does for customers is when we deploy it, we actually run them through a disaster recovery drill. So to give them that confidence, because as Jim said, there's nothing like having gone through it, or ideally having gone through it multiple times. Because again, it's one thing to look at it on paper. It's another thing. I used to joke about they should administer Microsoft tests by putting on a headset and having a manager yell in your ear while you're trying to come up with the answer to a problem, because that's what the real world is like.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So time check, we have about 10 minutes left. So we'll get to another question, great question. And then we'll go to the final polling question.
Yep.
And we'll kind of wrap up. I do want to still talk cyber insurance because it's such a big topic. But first question from Caleb: when conducting an audit of AD, what would you advise is the single most important item to focus on?
Oh,
I'm going to throw that at you, Luke.
man, that's pressure.
We turn on a bunch of auditing. I mean,
I was going to say, yeah, we talked about, we hit some points earlier around enabling those advanced auditing and audit events to ensure you're capturing the data associated with typical attack vectors that bad actors would leverage. I mean, we kind of talked about having a recovery plan.
I'll tell you, from my perspective, here's what I'd say: run purple limit. That to me is the best first step, because you're going to get a broad and deep look at where your biggest holes are, because everyone's holes are in a different place. to me, that's the simplest way of doing it, or some other tool if you have it, but obviously it doesn't cost you a thing, and you will very quickly gain a lot of knowledge on what your state of security is over Active Directory.
That's fair.
Yeah, good. All right, now that's single most important. Look, we hear that all the time, right? There's over 15,000 downloads of Purple Knight. It's widely used out there, so it's a great first step. All right, Josh, let's get to the final polling question, and then we'll talk a little cyber insurance.
Oh, this is an appropriate question after we just had this talk.
Yeah, yeah.
Interesting.
Thank you, Mr. Doobie, for this.
Yeah. Well, yeah, again, this is to steal a phrase from Alex Weinert, who uses it for everything, it's worse than you think.
Okay.
That says a lot.
Yep.
I was, hope is the wrong word necessarily, but after our discussion about recovery, I hope that it will cause people to come back and look very carefully at what they need to do.
Okay, so why don't we go to in a few minutes, Jim, just talk about I hear about cyber insurance all the time. We all do. It's very intertwined to having a security strategy to lower premiums and things like that. So can you share how the cyber insurance industry has evolved from your perspective, and kind of where does AD preparedness fit in there?
Okay, yeah, I think it's a great topic. And by the way, this is one we could literally spend the entire hour on with not even blinking an eye. So this is going to be the Reader's Digest at a very high level kind of version, at least of what I'm thinking about. Again, when I was at AIG, AIG wrote the most amount of cyber insurance of any company out there in the world at the time. So I got very familiar with this. And during that era, this was about 5 years ago, insurance was quite frankly easy to get. You bought cyber insurance. Insurance companies made money off of it because there weren't that many claims, quite frankly. And then came ransomware. All of a sudden, costs went through the roof. You had out of business, so you had all the lost revenue costs. You had the cost to get things back up and running. So to me, it's a very simple business rule. Insurance companies started losing money on it, so they raised rates and made it harder to get. So they're doing exactly what you would expect them to do. Now, it's great that we all want to complain about their rates going up and all that, but it's a business and they've got to make money too, or they're not going to sell insurance. So to me, I like to actually think of it as the areas that insurance companies for cyber insurance focus on are the areas that we probably ought to be paying attention to, because they know already that these are the areas that are going to be causing the problems, which cost them money. So they are likely to be some of your highest risk areas that are doing that. And that's one reason Active Directory has moved way, way up on the list of their priorities. They have realized that a ransomware attack is far more expensive than other forms of attack and theft of data and other things. So they are highly focused on that. Now, yes, insurance is more expensive. It is harder to get. The advice that I have to you is listen to what they say. They focus on areas where they think the risk is the highest. So they're going to push you in directions of where you need to focus on better controls and those type of things. And if you want the insurance, you're going to have to do that. The biggest piece of advice that I always give, though, is be very, very careful when you start answering the questions. Because they're going to send you a questionnaire and you're going to have to show documents. They basically want to audit you to see how secure are you up front. Too many of us still ask a question like, do you encrypt your data? Instead of saying just yes, you need to say yes and then talk in the little section below where you can write details. You need to get into the details of what they're insured, what's being encrypted, not just what's there. Because if you get attacked, you had stated earlier, we encrypt our data, and they find out that the data that they got stolen was not encrypted, boom, deny the claim. And I could give you dozens and dozens of examples of that. So So number one, security teams need to get involved with these questionnaires and in cyber insurance. It's not just a legal thing anymore. You have to be confident that we've answered the questions appropriately. And secondarily, work with those insurance companies, because if something goes wrong, they're going to insist on bringing an expert of their choice, not your choice necessarily, to help evaluate what's going on. We could go on and on for that, but I still think I'm still a big believer in cyber insurance. There's a whole lot of people in the industry that think that in today's environment, maybe we should just self-insure and do X, Y, and Z. To me, it's just like your house. Even if you don't have a mortgage, I suspect you want insurance just in case.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
All
Absolutely.
right, sorry for the speed talk, but that's
No. I mean, look, cyber insurance is something that I deal with almost every meeting with end users and partners, and I think it's gaining more and more steam as these as these compromises and hackers continue to get more sophisticated with the with the event of their attacks. So, all right, we're coming up on 2 minutes here, so I wanted to thank the audience for hanging in there, and hopefully you've proved that this was educational for you and you've taken one or two things back. Certainly reach out to us if you have any questions, but I'll allow the panelists to kind of add their closing remarks for a few seconds before we adjourn. So Sean, you want to go first?
Oh gosh. Yeah, I honestly, it's look at the forest recovery process. You look at the Microsoft documentation, because if you look it up at 2 a.m., it's too late. If you're not considering an automated product like Active Directory Forest Recovery, take that forest recovery document and internalize it and map it out into your own environment. And then, as Jim said, test it.
Yep. Luke?
I would echo exactly what Sean says. I know we kind of hit. I can't do that. No. Okay. Well, we do have, I mean, kind of what Jim was alluding to earlier as well, Purple Knight, Forest Druid. We have free tools out there. There's other free tools. I think assessing your environment and getting an idea, or at least a handle on, hey, I know I have problems, but I'm not sure where they are, and I'm not sure where to focus my time and efforts. I would call it almost like an inventory of your environment today. I think Purple Knight, again, it's free. It's a great tool to leverage. And don't hesitate to reach out. We've got a lot of brilliant minds in the identity and AD space here at Semperis, and folks that are willing to help out and answer. I mean, our motto here is a force for good, and I would say that everybody lives and breathes that motto here at Semperis.
Great. Jim, 30 seconds.
I won't even use that. I'm going to use 12. If you have not evaluated from your perspective Active Directory, please do it. It's a risk that you need to focus on. It's one that is ignored by a lot of people. And there's a few people here, obviously, that have done it, but it's an area you guys do need to think about, because I think the risk is pretty doggone high.
Okay. Well, hey, that concludes right at the mark. Special thanks to Holly, Josh, the entire Carahsoft team.
Yes.
Again, thank you all for attending. Hopefully it was educational. Hopefully you'll take a couple of things back and research some things, as the guy said. So thanks, everybody. Much appreciated.
Appreciate your time, guys.
Thanks again, Kevin, Jim, Sean, and Luke, for your participation. And I want to thank all of our participants for joining us today. We hope that you found this webcast informative and helpful to you and your organization. Please take a moment to answer the questions that will appear on your browser after the webinar. We appreciate your feedback. And for those who met the CPE requirements today, you'll receive your certificate of completion within 2 weeks. If you have any further questions or would like to request more information, please feel free to contact us. Our contact information is currently being displayed, so please don't hesitate to call or email us. And finally, in the next day or two, we'll be emailing you all a link to an archived version of this webcast, along with a few additional resources so you can review it or pass it along to a colleague. Thank you again for attending.